Hey everybody, it's Jenna. Welcome to my 100th video. To celebrate, I put out the call for questions about comics, about movies, about myself, and y'all definitely delivered. I cannot answer all of them, and there are a few that I might use as jumping on points for future videos, but I think I ended up picking a pretty fun mix. So just sit back, relax, and enjoy. By far, the biggest question I got is, what is the first comic I ever read? It was this random issue of Sabrina the Teenage Witch. I don't physically have the copy on me because I lent it to my little sister years ago, but I think I need to get it back from her just for the historical artifact of it all. The second biggest question was some variation of how I got into this space and what made me start making YouTube videos. It has been funny realizing over the course of this past year that a lot of you have found me directly through this channel and do not know my lore at all. I will admit that I do kind of love having that air of mystery, but the simplest version of the story is I worked at an outlet for almost 9 years as a writer and eventually as an on-camera host. A little over a year ago, I no longer worked at that outlet. And around that time, I had really gotten back into watching YouTube. I was watching hours-long, expertly researched video essays on comics and old movies, and I was also getting back into the world of John and Hank Green, who I've followed since the 2000s and who are unparalleled at sitting at a desk and making you care about a topic in the span of a few minutes. I wanted to try out combining both of those energies into my own videos, while also giving myself a new place to talk in front of a camera. I made the channel, I made the logo, and then they both just kind of sat there for weeks as I massively overthought what my first video would be. Then the Creature Commandos trailer dropped at New York Comic Con, and the rest is history. What are some of your favorite hobbies and interests outside of the comic book entertainment space? I crochet, which I should really get into the habit of posting more about online, but I always have this weird mental block around sharing my work. I paint, I play video games, I listen to podcasts with Comedy Bang Bang, The Dollop, and You Must Remember This most heavily in rotation. I watch football, and I am absolutely in awe of how my Bears are doing so far this year. I watch Survivor, and my husband and I take walks around parks or forest preserves. Literally, if a week or so goes by without us going on one of those walks, my mental health starts to feel it. Are there any anime that you're a fan of? There are so many that I know I would like, but they feel like such massive time commitments that I haven't really had a chance to dive into them. But I have started to dip my toe into One Piece, especially after how fantastic the first season of the live action show was. Literally the morning I'm recording this, Cholo Mariduena got cast in season 3, and I am excited. What's your favorite fruit? Peaches and strawberries. Have you played video games? If so, could you discuss your experience with them? I do love some of the big triple, quadruple A narrative-based games, but I usually find myself gravitating towards Fortnite and Balatro. Not just because I've gotten good at both, but because they are the right level of unpredictable to me while I'm still able to just turn my brain off and relax. I cannot imagine being the type of person who relaxes playing Elden Ring. I also feel like I am alone on an island of still loving Lego Fortnite. If that ever gets shut down, I will cry. What are some of your favorite novels? I'm going to use this as an excuse to highlight one in particular, Life After Life by Kate Atkinson. It might be my favorite time loop and time travel story, to the point where I have been actively putting off watching the TV adaptation for a few years now, because I'm almost worried that it will not live up to the love that I have for it in my head. Why did you stop doing the monthly favorites videos? Was it a lack of free time or just because they weren't performing well? Either way, I would like to see them back. First of all, I appreciate that. Second of all, it was a combination of things. They definitely performed the lowest of my videos at the time, and I also just got busy from the beginning of 2025 onward, between making other videos and planning a wedding and just existing. I also found that when I was doing them, I became way too aware of my media consumption. If I sat down to watch or read or listen to something, I suddenly felt like I had to make the most of it in order to have something to talk about at the end of the month. It felt way too performative, especially when there are some months where a good chunk of my media consumption is just rewatching Smiling Friends and The Simpsons for the millionth time. I might do a big favorites video at the end of the year though. There are no comic book projects left in 2025 other than Batfam. Parentheses, watch Merry Little Batman, y'all. What other shows and or movies do you plan to cover in the meantime? First of all, yes, y'all should go watch Merry Little Batman. Second of all, I'm just going to let the inspiration take me wherever it wants to go. There will inevitably still be news and hopefully trailers to talk about. And honestly, making over 3 hours worth of Peacemaker videos was a massive undertaking. One that I loved taking and am still endlessly proud of, but it kind of led me to shove any perennial ideas into a corner. Now I have the time to make some of those happen, and I already have an idea of what my next few are going to be. A lot of them are probably going to take the vibe of the Brainiac video that I posted last week. How do you find time to balance consuming all your favorite types of media? As someone who is also a big fan of comics, movies, TV, and music, I struggle to keep up with them without at least one being a bit neglected. Guess what? I honestly struggle with it too. I always have a huge stack of comics to read. I can never keep my Letterboxd watch list under control, and I feel so out of the loop with mainstream TV unless it's something that I desperately need to watch or want to talk about. I think there are two things that have helped me to come to terms with that. One was refining my personal tastes and just getting better at following my instincts and recognizing what I want to watch or read or listen to at a particular moment. I kind of equate it to a wine cellar. Some bottles might get opened immediately after I put them in there, while others might sit a little bit and age to the point where I know that they're going to be perfect for me. The second part was reminding myself that it's okay to be out of the loop on some conversations on pieces of media. Word of mouth can obviously always change that and make me want to prioritize something quickly, but I try not to feel obligated to catch up on something just because there's a conversation happening around it. It's about recognizing that my time has value and I don't need to waste it on something that I'm not strongly drawn to. Who are your other favorite artists? In some ways, my answer is exactly what you would expect from a blonde white woman with a nose ring who is always going to have Taylor Swift at the top of her Spotify Wrapped. Sabrina Carpenter, Chapel Roan, Muna, Griff. I've been on a Japanese house kick lately, especially after seeing them open for Lorde a few months ago, and I will also use this as an excuse to mention a friend of mine, Nick Let's-Go. Nobody on this planet makes music that is simultaneously so heartfelt and positively batshit as what he does. I cannot even attempt to explain the lore of these songs on the Computer Saga out of context, but if even one person watching this goes down that rabbit hole and likes what they find, I will be so proud. What are some of your favorite albums? This is difficult because there are hundreds I could name depending on what side of the bed I wake up on a particular day. But there are a few that genuinely mean the world to me, where listening to them as a complete text from beginning to end is an experience every single time. 1989 is in an entirely separate echelon for me. Travis Kelce and I are exactly the same here.
You make a third 1989, I'll listen to that one too.
Built.
Also, Hosier's self-titled album and Folie à Deux by Fall Out Boy. Literally, I put it on while writing the script, and once What a Catch Donnie started, I fully blacked out and could not write anything until it was over. If you could put Taylor Swift into a comic book story, what universe would you place her in, and what characters would you have her interact with? Honestly, I would just love to see her hang out with Kara and Streaky. I also want to see what kind of bread she would bake for everybody in the Justice League. Thoughts on Life of a Showgirl? Are there any parallels to comics or film? I love this question to the point where I debated turning it into an entire video. Fun fact, when I launched this channel, I totally envisioned using it to react to Rep TV and Debut TV. Little did I know. To me, every Taylor drop, whether it's a Taylor's version or an entirely new album, feels like my brain just got a software update. It is an overwhelming amount of information that I don't entirely know how to process at first, but as time passes and I make connections to each song and I discover the layers to her artistry, I get to a point where I cannot imagine my life without it. That has absolutely been my journey with Showgirl. And even as it is absurdly, astronomically popular right now, I feel like it's the kind of album that is only going to get better and better respected over time. There is so much more to it than a lot of the knee-jerk reactions initially thought. I keep finding new layers and meaning to certain lyrics, and even though I am a Spotify devotee, listening to the album on the highest quality setting on Apple Music and being able to hear some of the choices that she made in the production practically opened my third eye. I think this is one of the strongest 4-track runs of her entire discography. The Fate of Ophelia is her best single and music video in years, and seeing it on the big screen was bonkers. And I love that Opalite is going to become such a smash, while having such a beautiful metaphor and sentiment for creating your own happiness. And I think the album as a whole is sentimental, but confident and comfortable, to the point of not feeling obligated to please everyone. It's a piece of work that only Taylor could make in the exact way that she made it. There are two pieces of art that it reminds me of. The first is Jack Kirby's comic adaptation of 2001: A Space Odyssey. Both were made by creators who had been recently given a chance to put previous professional animosities aside, Kirby with his journey from Marvel to DC and back to Marvel, and Taylor with her masters. And both didn't necessarily meet the expectations that people already had in their heads. In Kirby's case, because he definitely took some narrative liberties with adapting the film. But both are maximalist pieces of pop art that only their specific creators could have made in the way that they made them. And the second one is partially due to their proximity to each other, but I will always see this album and the season 2 finale of Peacemaker in a similar vein. Like I said in my video on that episode, it really feels like such a unique instance of James wearing his heart on his sleeve and creating a piece of art that is meaningful to him, even if it isn't unanimously meant that way by everybody else. And no matter the initial knee-jerk reactions that people have at the time, I think both are going to be remembered as something special. Let me get ahead of Letterboxd and ask you your top 4 favorite movies. My actual top 4 on Letterboxd is Birds of Prey, Kiki's Delivery Service, The Princess Diaries, and Barbarella. But honestly, there are dozens of movies that could get swapped in and out of that, depending on the day and the mood that I'm in. What was the first comic book movie you ever saw? Honestly, it was probably Batman and Robin, a movie that I will still defend to this day, warts and all. Being a Hunger Games fan myself, who else would you like to learn more about their story? My picks are Finnick or Joanna. Joanna and also Annie. Part of me thinks Finnick's story would be a little too dark, especially especially with what we know happens to him after he wins, but I have really learned to trust the process with whatever Suzanne Collins is cooking. You've mentioned William Powell is a favorite of yours. Who are some of your other favorite actresses from the classic movie era? Myrna Loy, which should not be a surprise because she and Powell did 14 movies together, but also because she is one of the coolest women of her time. Katharine Hepburn, Veronica Lake, and I mention him at every single opportunity I get, but Cary Grant. I will sit through the most mundane movie of his filmography just to watch him make a meal out of dialogue or do something with his face that I didn't think was humanly possible. What are some of your must-watch movies when they're on TCM? The actual answers to this question are The Thin Man and His Girl Friday. I have seen the third acts of both of those movies so many times just from catching them on TV. But I also need to have an honorable mention for the movies that I don't necessarily physically catch, but I'm always happy to see that they're airing. Jewel Robbery, The Philadelphia Story, Sunday in New York, and Sex and the Single Girl. What are 5 non-comic book movies you believe everyone should see? Singing in the Rain, Charade, Thelma and Louise, Mad Max Fury Road. Yes, it technically has a comic tie-in, but that tie-in is not good, so I'm going to count it here. And a documentary that you have probably not heard of called Shirkers. How do you feel about the divide in the fandom about Disney adapting Old Republic stuff from the games and books? I think that Star Wars in general has become a weird beast. Disney has simultaneously been too precious with the brand until recently to commit to making a new movie, but has also made it feel like less of an event with the quantity and quality of the Disney Plus shows. I think that has made some fans hesitant to see anything adapted. And then when you fold in how beloved the Old Republic lore already is, and how much a lot of its fans have already built it up in their heads, I think there's a fear that it just won't be done right. I am bummed that their movie plans for KOTOR have kind of stalled out though, because it was initially being written by the showrunner of the Birds of Prey TV show. Who's your favorite comic artist? For me, currently it's Hayden Sherman. First of all, I love Hayden. I interviewed them and Kelly Thompson for Absolute Wonder Woman earlier this year, so go check that out if you haven't already. I cannot narrow it down to just one artist, so I'm going to list a bunch. In terms of classic artists, obviously Jack Kirby, and also Neil Adams, George Perez, Jose Luis Garcia Lopez, and Alex Toth. Do not even get me started on Toth, because I can evangelize about him for hours, and I will do that more in a second. In terms of modern artists, Jorge Jimenez, Cliff Chang, and Zoe Thorogood. Go read her graphic novel, It's Lonely at the Center of the Earth, immediately. Is there one comic book character with whom you have a particularly strong emotional connection, and what is the story that best represents what you love about them? Black Canary. She will always be my number one with a bullet forever. I could be here for the rest of the day just listing stories of hers that I love, but I'll stick with 2. The first is her 2-part solo story in Adventure Comics number 418 and 419, which distills so much of where her character was at the time into this impossibly cool 70s package. And Alex Toth's art is just so kinetic and so beautiful. And the second is Birds of Prey number 66. It treats the legacy of the 2 Black Canaries with a respect and an earnestness that they always deserve. And it builds to a reveal that I never knew I needed, but that Gail Simone handles beautifully. How do you read comics? Fast, slow, assigning voices, playing music, scanning the whole page or panel by panel, etc. What's your process? This feels weirdly intimate to answer, but I think it all ultimately depends on the book and its pacing. I don't actively go out of my way to assign voices, but I think I stumble into them. The more I read of a character, the more a distinct voice forms in my head, but it's not really something I can mimic out loud. It's kind of like how you can't really describe your own internal monologue. And honestly, there are sometimes when I can hear Dinah and Ollie's internal monologue better than I can hear my own. It also depends on the tone of the writing and whether or not that captures the essence of the character. For example, rereading the Charlton-era Peacemaker stories between season 1 and season 2, I could hear John Cena's voice so clearly. And more recently, when rereading Panic in the Sky, I found myself reading Nathan Fillion's Guy Gardner voice without even realizing it. In terms of music, if I'm revisiting something for research purposes, I might have music on, but if I'm locking in and reading something for the first time, I usually go without, at least until I can get a feel of the flow of everything and not necessarily have the music dictate that for me. And honestly, I've spoken about this before, but a particularly good comic or a good comic sequence can make you feel like you're already hearing music in your head. Also, I'm trying to get into comics, but I really struggle to follow the story and pick up on all the details. I finish an issue feeling like I only grasped less than half of it. I miss the emotional stuff and have a hard time relating to characters. I don't have this with regular books or movies. I think the easiest answer might be, try a different kind of comic, a different era, a different genre, a different format like manga, or a different set of characters, and see if that resonates with you. It doesn't mean that you can't get back on board with the stories that you've already tried, but you just might need a better on-ramp into comics, and that's okay. Please recommend some comics with non-superhero characters. Saga, Sex Criminals, Sweet Tooth, criminal. Also, just go down the rabbit hole of any old romance or war comics. How to balance both indie comics and major big two comics to read. I think it goes back to what I was saying earlier about refining your tastes and being a little choosy. I used to feel like I needed to try to be on the bandwagon for any indie comic that had gotten big, especially when Image was consistently putting out banger after banger in the 2010s. But over time, I found that certain indie premises just don't do it for me, or better if I wait and read them in collected editions, and that both of those formats are okay. If a book has a creative team or a concept that I know I want to read immediately, then I prioritize it. Otherwise, it's kind of like the wine cellar analogy that I mentioned earlier, where I just kind of save them for the right moment. Are there any iconic stories that are massively loved but didn't click for you? Killing Joke. It is not without its value, but I think it is far from Alan Moore's most interesting work at DC. To me, it has also become this weird snake eating its own tail situation, where its popularity is impossible to untangle from the knowledge of what happens to Barbara. I'm sure there are some people who pick it up without knowing that beforehand, and it is technically accessible as a story, but the popularity of it does make me feel kind of gross sometimes. Do you have a comfort food for comics? Something you particularly enjoyed or resonated with so much you reread it every so often? Satellite era JLA. It is basically a sacred text to me at this point, and I know that I don't have the time to devote to a full front-to-back reread of it, but the second that I need to pull a panel or double-check something for a video, I feel the urge to dive in and at least reread a few issues at a time. What is an uncommon/unknown comic plotline you think about often? Millennium. It was one of DC's annual attempts to try to recapture the magic of Crisis in the late 80s, and it is wild. It has its flaws, but it swings for the fences in a way that I really admire and that I think about way too often. And I do always find it funny that there is canonically a DC event that starts with the acknowledgement that the Guardians of the Universe fuck. What do you think creators and publishers can do to grow the next generation of comic readers? I think there are already a lot of steps being made in the right direction. The YA and middle grade graphic novels, the accessibility and price points of things like the DC Compact line, and just the creative approach to certain story initiatives and events. If I had been given the Absolute Universe or DCKO when I was a tween or a teenager, it would have fully rewired my brain. I feel like whether a new reader is coming in from book talk or anime and manga or the movies, they're already willing to dive in and explore the lore even if they don't necessarily know it yet. And I think it's just about meeting them where they're at and guiding them into it by offering them something that is too cool and too accessible to pass up. What do you think is the future of physical comics, namely single issues? Physical comics will never die, but I think they will definitely continue to evolve. We might not be able to get back to the days of holding the line at $2.99, but I think offering really good covers or can't miss storylines are going to make people want to take the jump and actually buy the floppies. I also think that the state of collected editions is getting better than ever, especially with DC Finest, to the point where there might be a further shift towards reading things in hardcover or trade paperbacks. Do you believe the comic industry is stronger than ever? Yes and no. It has definitely exceeded my expectations in the rebound after COVID, and I think that there's an embarrassment of riches in terms of the creativity and ambition that is currently on display. But there are still some things that I think certain publishers could do better or differently, especially to adapt to that kind of audience that I was just talking about. Why do you think there's such a reluctance for a lot of people to engage with comics as a valid art form in and of themselves? I think it's a combination of things. The larger culture shifting away from literacy and art appreciation and just critical thinking, the fact that the medium's history is tragically filled with decades of consumers and even creators viewing it as disposable, and I kind of touched on this in my video earlier this year about spoilers and surprises, but I think some people approach this space and these characters like rooting for a sports team. They're chasing the win and the high of the next big blockbuster without really engaging with the potential that the source material has always had. What are the most ambitious things you've read in comics that you want to see adapted to the big screen? What are the challenges that can stop that from happening? I think part of the beauty of comics is that the format allows you to tell stories that can't exactly work anywhere else. Things like Absolute Martian Manhunter and Saga and the Choose Your Own Adventure issue of the Terrifics could technically be adapted on screen, but a lot of the specific DNA of them would have to change along the way, and it's okay to recognize that and not force it. But in terms of pure narrative ambition, I would love to see a version of the Krakoa era on screen, even though I know that the expansiveness of it would basically be impossible to translate. Even in a world where it could be its own cinematic universe, kind of like how the X-Men movies were at Fox for decades, there would still be some things lost in translation or some consolations that would be made to sell it to mainstream audiences. You've mentioned before that Green Arrow is one of your favorite DC characters. Which writer is your favorite to handle the character? And if it's Denny O'Neil, who is your second favorite, because everybody says Denny O'Neil? Your assumption is correct, because my favorite absolutely is Denny O'Neil. I cannot overstate how important he is to comics and to evolving Ollie and Dinah and Hal beyond where they already were at the time. My second favorite would either be Jerry Conway, who wrote a lot of Dinah and Ollie in the early 80s, both in JLA and in solo stories, and Judd Winnick's more modern run on Green Arrow. Any recommendations for someone who wants to get into Zatanna? Zatanna. In terms of solo stuff, Zatanna Bring Down the House and Jamal Campbell's recent miniseries are great places to start. I am also always going to recommend Bloodspell because her dynamic with Dinah is so perfect within it. And honestly, just start with when she joins the Satellite Era Justice League in Justice League of America number 161. And not just because it eventually leads to my favorite costume of hers. Favorite Fantastic Four comics. In terms of entire runs, Lee and Kirby's original run is definitely the gold standard. I also do love the Byrne era, especially when She-Hulk joined the team. In terms of single issues, I think This Man, This Monster is one of the best comics that has ever been made. And I do not know if this one is my favorite because it breaks my heart even just thinking about it, but the Ultimates number 4 has never fully left my brain for the past year. Who's your favorite DC character that's been introduced in the last 5 years? Red Canary. I could go on a rant about this for an hour, but Black Canary was long overdue for a proper legacy sidekick. And now she technically has 2 since Sin has been brought back in Birds of Prey. And I think the gimmick of Red Canary and her home life has been unexpected enough to let her stand on her own, which is just so fun to see. Who's your favorite D-list DC character? This answer changes on an hourly basis for me, especially because in my mind the D-list is so subjective. But just purely for recency bias, since I mentioned them when talking about Salvation in my finale video, the Body Doubles. They are the epitome of goofy 90s cheesecake, but they are so much fun and have such strong personalities. I keep desperately wanting a modern reboot that really leans into the camp of them. Who do you like more for Scott Summers, Emma Frost, or Jean Grey? Jean, but I think that they both bring out different elements of him in really meaningful ways. If I'm going to be honest, my default has just become shipping a sort of 4-way polycule between Scott, Emma, Jean, and Logan, just to never have to definitively choose one way or another. For reading something like Jack Kirby's Fourth World books, would it be your preference to jump between the different series by tracking the issue's individual release order, or complete each book sequentially from Jimmy Olsen to Mr. Miracle? I am proud to say that I've converted multiple people to the beauty of Fourth World, and the way that I approach it is usually kind of a bit of both. If someone is definitely enthusiastic about diving into it, I usually recommend that they invest in one of the omnibuses, both because they are such a collector's item and because they do a lot of the heavy lifting for you. But if you're just wanting to dip in, I honestly think the way that DC Universe Infinite has it organized is a really good way to go, kind of alternating back and forth between Mr. Miracle, New Gods, and the Forever People. Assuming you're aware of or have played the Batman Arkham video game series, what do you think about their portrayal of Batman, of Gotham, its villains and characters, etc.? I have not fully played them, but I am very culturally aware of them. I think that they are absolutely of the time in good ways and in bad. And I think the fact that they were so many people's first entry point into Batman alongside the Nolan movies has led to some of the weird feelings about grimdark Batman that I've talked about in some of my other videos. What is your opinion on Iron Man from all forms of media? I love a lot of things about Tony, but I also think that he's a character who is very easy to mishandle. I get that with the sliding timescale, there are some easy shortcuts to modernize him and give him new kinds of real-world guilt, but I hate when the sentiment of him being a futurist gets lost along the way. And as iconic as RDJ's portrayal is, it has led to some of the fandom flanderization that I talked about in my Brainiac video, where Tony is defaulted to being the cockiest, smartest person in the room who just wants to solve the problem as quickly as possible so he can go home. This is just a long-winded way of me saying, go read Christopher Cantwell's excellent Iron Man run, which reconciles with all of that in a really beautiful way. Who's your favorite Harley Quinn actor? Margot Robbie, easily. Not just because of how she championed the entire existence of Birds of Prey, but just because of the commitment that she has always had to the role. Harley is a character who demands respect, for lack of a better term, and Margot has set the bar astronomically high in that regard. Cast the Pretzel Gang and Mary Holland in the DCU. For those of you who don't know, the Pretzel Gang are Scott Aukerman, Paul F. Tompkins, and Lauren Lapkus. I mean, obviously they should play themselves in the Mr. Miracle animated show, but beyond that, I've always imagined Paul as either Giovanni Zatara or Uncle Dudley from the Shazam family. My husband suggested Roger Denning from Animal Man for Scott, and I like that. Lauren should voice some kind of alien, I don't really care which one, and I feel like Mary needs to play some sort of villainess, like Roxy Rocket or Hazard. Think DC could pull off / do the Legion of Superheroes. I think we could see characters from the team in the DCU, especially with one of my favorite weirdos on the entire roster, Matter Eater Lad, now being DCU canon, but I think there is so much that can be introduced in the present day that we really don't need them. They are not quite unadaptable, but they're already such a massive concept and such a massive roster with so much love behind them that it would be a very, very tall order. James has already said that he isn't interested in doing time travel stories, and I do respect that decision, especially because I do think introducing the Legion with this Clark or this Kara kind of predetermines their destiny in a way that would take away some of the fun. What do you think about the Authority? As characters, assuming you've read their comics, and as a project, do you think it will still be made? I like them, and I do think that they have a lot of narrative potential on the page and on the screen. I feel like Jenny Sparks in particular is one of those characters who's like 2 steps away from being a household name who everybody loves. But I do respect and honestly agree with the decision to pivot away from their project in the DCU. The lore around them would be a lot to sell to general audiences. And I do feel like we're getting out of the cynical, edgy, the boys era of engaging with superhero projects that it would have easily fallen into. Plus, Plus, like I was just saying with the Legion, I think there are so many other characters in the main DCU who we've either met, are going to meet, or could meet that it makes sense to focus on them instead. Would you rather have a Peacemaker Season 3 or a Checkmate Season 1? I do recognize that calling the story Peacemaker Season 3 might be an easier sell, but there is so much that we don't know at this point. When and how Chris's cliffhanger gets picked up on and what shape a Checkmate show could take could all be so beyond everybody's expectations that I am just trusting the process either way. Favorite Lantern Corps and why? Green, both because of the characters within it and just because of how the lore is expanded into this massive and weird tapestry without ever losing the essence of how the gimmick worked in the Golden and Silver Age. But also the Star Sapphires, because I really love the sentiment of love being a tangible superhero force that is as strong as willpower, and they are just such a fun foil to anyone that they share the page with. What's something in John and Hal's dynamics and lanterns you want to see, or a deep cut from the Green Lantern mythos you want to see? I want to see them take the piss out of each other, but from a place of total love and respect, which is something that they do time and time again in the comics. And based on the quote that Chris Mundy had the other day, it sounds like we are absolutely getting that. In terms of deep cuts, this is so silly. I want a reference to Hal being a toy salesman or a truck driver. I love his and Ollie's goofy string of jobs in the comics, and I can absolutely buy Kyle's version of Hal in either of those jobs, even just reluctantly to make ends meet. Do you think DC should do more to incorporate the Green Lantern universe into their comics, movies, TV shows, and games? And do you think a single poorly received movie should have such a lasting negative impact on a character, especially one as significant as Green Lantern, that leads to them getting lesser use in comics, movies, games, and TV shows? As much as the movie made Green Lantern into a punching bag in the mainstream, I do not think that necessarily stopped good Green Lantern stories from being told. Far Sector and Green Lantern Earth 1 and some of the more recent comics have been genuinely great, but I do agree that they should be used more, and I think we are nearing a turning point for that to happen. Thank you so much to everyone who submitted questions. Seriously, there were way more than I could even remotely answer, and thank you so much for your support as I have gotten to 100 videos. Share your thoughts in the comments below, and please be sure to like, subscribe, and share with your friends if you haven't already done so. As always, you can find me on social media, especially on Threads at Hey It's Jenna Lynn. Merch is available at the link in the description. Thank you all so much for watching, and as always, go read some comics.